Hello, fellow YouTubers. I'm Driven D&D, and welcome to the DM's panel Open Forum, Episode 2. Today, am pleased to have some very special guests with me. We have Jake, Benjamin, DBJ, and last but not least, Matt. And I'll give each of them a moment to introduce themselves, plug the groups, channels, any particular product wish to plug, etc. So let's begin with you, DBJ.
Hello, everyone. This is DBJ, Dave Breon Jackson, but DBJ is fine. You'll see my face, and I usually poke myself in a lot of social media. I've been away from my YouTube channel for quite a while now because I've been writing, and right now, up to the 4th installment of the Cinematic Environs books produced by Critical Hit Publishing, and I'm an old guy. That's it.
Awesome. Jake, how about you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jake. I am also known as Complacent Badger over here on the tubes, but for the most part, I'm just a humble GM and a new contributor over at Dawn Forgecast.
Awesome. Benjamin, you're up.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm living in the Idaho area and really enjoying seeing some of this great content that's being put out on various Facebook groups. All these ways of using Google Hangouts and other multimedia in order to get gaming out there to people so they can play with people wherever they happen to be in the United States or in the whole world. Trying to get the right timing down when you get to be up there in age as I feel I'm getting now that I'm in my 40s. I'm really glad that I get to find people who want to play at a particular time. In this way, we can actually find those nooks and crannies in our busy schedules to actually get to play almost any time of the day or night. I've been really impressed with that. But if you feel like gaming, you just look and look, somebody wants to run something, and you get right to it. It works out really well. Other than that, I'm just really pleased to get to talk with a bunch of other Dungeon Masters today.
Awesome. And last but definitely not least, Matt.
Yep, I'm Matt. I run the channel A Fistful of Dice, and I also publish RPG supplements over at AbsoluteTabletop.com with some other content producers here on YouTube. And I'm really excited to be here, and I just want to thank Jaren for inviting me to participate, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with you guys.
Not a problem, Matt. I was glad one of you guys were able to make it. I never get enough time with the members of AbTab between my busy schedule and this. And I'm Driven D&D. I run the Disabled DM YouTube channel. Oh, I'm also working on putting out some PDF supplements, homebrewing some pretty interesting content, constantly DM. And before I really begin the DM's panel, I do have one announcement to make. Not this month, but at the end of next month, I will be hosting another 24 hours of one shot that people are definitely invited to play in, participate in. And who knows, if I can get a couple other GMs, we might even extend it to like an all weekend type thing. And I see we have Devon with us.
Hey, what's going on?
Not too much. Just for our viewers, why don't you introduce yourself, plug a YouTube channel, product, group, up to you.
All right, well, I am Devin Akins. I don't really have a YouTube channel, though I do a lot of stuff with Dawn Forged Cast. I'm in a number of the campaigns, including Fuzz and Friends and Typhon, and I run the Sinland Trials for Andrew, Dylan, and Hark.
Awesome. That's where I knew your name from,
Yeah.
was Fuzz and Friends.
I'm also, I want to say, one of the few blind players that we have in the DFC community right now.
Oh, awesome. Um, um, for those that don't know, one of my big things with my channel is talking about different disabilities and how they affect us as game masters and players, and ways other GMs and players can make those people feel comfortable, etc. So it's always nice to meet new people that have some kind of disability that I can later on have guest appearance or something along those lines.
I would be more than happy to do that if you ever want to. Just add me on Facebook. I don't have very many people, so you won't get lost in the crowd.
Awesome. Usually what I do is it's kind of a open forum for us to really talk about whatever we want relating to RPGs, gaming. But this time we did have a commenter on the event post that asked for something specific. And what he is interested in is various cyberpunk elements and how they can be mixed with high fantasy, such as the classic RPG Shadowrun. So I'll kind of turn it over to the other DMs because I'm not really familiar with it. I played Shadowrun once, I played Planescape like once, and I use a very tiny bit of kind of the cyberpunk, steampunk feel in some of my rules, but it's not really something I'm familiar with. Whereas I know some of these people have more experience with other systems, etc. So, Matt, how about you start us off?
Well, I don't have a whole lot of experience with cyberpunk stuff, and actually I would say that I don't think I've ever played Shadowrun. I've looked at the books many times, and I've always been kind of interested in it, but for me, it's really tough to blend something like high fantasy and like the technology of cyberpunk, because you're looking at things like guns, robotics, computers, things that are for all intents and purposes, magic of a kind. And then you have high fantasy, which has elements of magic too. And so there is sort of that interesting dichotomy that you can play with, where it's like, you know, where does magic end and technology begin, and where do they mingle, and how do they interact with each other? But for me, that's always been tough. And so I would actually say that I don't consider myself an authority in that whatsoever, and I'm sure that someone else can talk a little bit more to it, and I am eager to learn more about it and hear more about it for sure, because it's something I've always been interested in.
Yeah, really exposure to it came out of some of the older Final Fantasy games where they had like the Magi Tech armor that was based on the magic of Vespers. So it's quite interesting to me as well. DBJ, I believe you were about to say something.
Yes. As a person who played the original Cyberpunk 2020 till it got dog-eared, played some first and second edition Shadowrun, and used a lot of the setting. You can kind of separate out the technology from the cyberpunk feel, and a cyberpunk feel is one where whatever the environment is, it's used, well abused, and everyone has access to it. And I think the closest feeling to that is probably Eberron. If anyone knows anything about Eberron, it uses classic Dungeons and Dragons, but the magic there is part of the economy. There are street lamps that are lit by light spells, and there are I remember a book, Sharn, a city in the clouds or something, and it's this towering city, and they have a postal system run by gargoyles. Like, the gargoyles fly through the air, and they drop off messages like bicycle messengers or something. There are goblins that work in the basement in this giant city, and they shovel coal and keep the gears running of the city. And instead of them, they're completely nasty little goblins, but all they do is go to work, get off of work, and then they go have a drink and complain about working, and then go back to work again because the trolls are their taskmaster or something. And that kind of everyday use of magic, to me, is the cyberpunk feel. You could almost, in cyberpunk, you can almost imagine a junkyard. Someone goes into the junkyard, finds pieces, and they build a robot. It's just junk sitting around, but someone's smart enough to find little pieces here, and there's video cameras, and I accidentally found a 50 caliber gun. I think I'll get some ammo for it, and it's just hanging around. As far as mixing the technology, that one can be difficult. Shadowrun, the current iterations, I'm not too familiar with. I have not played 4th or 5th edition of Shadowrun or something, but mixing the technologies can be a little difficult without establishing a baseline. For example, there's net running or hacking or jacking into systems. You would have to decide, is that the same as maybe going to another plane of existence or astral projection or something? In Shadowrun, I think dragons can be hackers, and magi can use their magic to control drones or robots or something, and so you would have to make that distinction. I think in general, role players tend to feel that magic and science do not go together. So if someone is better with one thing, they're not as good with another. And that's usually a general baseline. Hey, if I've got magic, machines don't work for me, or I'm no good at them. Or my magic spell can mentally control a human being. It can't mentally control a robot. But yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents.
Okay, awesome. Before we have some more comments on this, I'd like to give a shout out for the rest of Tab who have joined us in the live stream. And so, welcome, guys. Glad to have you with us. So, Jake, what do you think about various elements of cyberpunk and mixing them with high fantasy, and maybe how it can be done?
Well, for the cyberpunk specifically, I think Shadowrun does a really good job. Shadowrun 4th Ed, when I was fresh out of high school, was kind of like my bread and butter. And now I've gotten into the 5e, and I think they've cleared up a lot of the muddiness about it. But as was mentioned before with Matt, there's a dichotomy between technology and magic in there, and I think that's really important if that's the field that you're going for, where every every bit of technology that you put into your body takes away from your essence or your soul, which makes it more difficult to spellcast, because a lot of people can agree that the spellcasting generally comes from the ether around you, and taking yourself away from that is problematic. And that makes interesting character decisions, because at that point you're role-playing maybe somebody who's a little more cold and calculated because of all the enhancements that you've given yourself. Or as a magic user, you might be a little bit more touchy-feely, maybe not in the hippiest of ways, but you're more centered to what the Earth is. That also lends to, you know, the technomancer idea, people that were pulled from the internet and now can control machines with their mind. It's magic-esque, but it's a different beast. Whereas in my mainstay love is Warhammer 40,000, which is more of a marriage of high fantasy and technology. A lot of technology uses magical devices from the warp. They put a lot of explanation, but it ends up being it's high fantasy in space at its core. So utilizing ideas like that is the exact opposite of Shadowrun, where somebody who has, you know, giant power armor can also be wielding gigantic kinetic lightning bolts and whatnot. I think one of the most important things that if you're going to do a cyberpunk or a technological setting, even if there's fantasy or not, don't forget that just because somebody isn't trained in technology doesn't mean they need to make a roll for every single door to open up. Remember that this is your normal everyday life, so, you know, getting money or opening doors or various things, that shouldn't be blocked off to every single character just because they didn't put 30 points into technology.
Awesome. So, Devin, do you have anything to add?
Well, I did play a good deal of Shadowrun Third Ed, which and I've wanted to get into Warhammer 40K, but I haven't had the chance. But I will say that the most important thing to me is having a reason for your technology and magic to be in the same situation. The reason that they're so comparable in Shadowrun is because they had tech before they had magic, or at least before they had magic in living memory. They were well along towards cybernetics and whatnot, I think, when the comet showed up and people started regaining all like the goblinoid traits and magic and all that stuff. So they kind of developed side by side as two means to the same end. Also, I think the feel that is it DJ or JD?
You're right.
Yeah, yeah. That dystopian feel is very, very important to Shadowrun, and not only the junkyard feel, but also the juxtaposition of like the corporate sponsors and their sleek new, really dolled up tech as compared to what a lot of the runners have to go with, which is the dregs of that, what gets cast out and what they can manage to steal or kind of chop out. And that's a really neat part of Shadowrun. That's a big reason why I like it as well. And a note about Eberron, I think that's how you say that. I really, really like that. It's very. I always wonder if you have so much magic, and especially if your magic is really spread out, like in maybe the world of Pathfinder, why it isn't more commonplace and industrialized, because that seems like it would be the natural next step if you compare it to like Earth's history. What we've done would be to start making life convenient, to try to make money for yourself, etc., etc. Thus the birth of capitalism. But yeah, I like a lot of that stuff.
Awesome. How about you, Benjamin?
I like what people have been saying so far. I did most of my gaming with Cyberpunk actually with GURPS rules, and of course Steve Jackson has, you know, had their own Cyberpunk books to that effect, and of course they're all about the generic, trying to make it possible for you to use, you know, things from various systems or various books, works of fiction together. And when I have run or had other people run Shadowrun kinds of games, I think they tend to be one-shots. People are really interested in playing a character that has, you know, both a cybernetic limb as well as casting spells in kind of this hey, this system can allow you to do that. Wouldn't it be cool to have all this stuff? People kind of go down a checklist and just start adding what they want. And so in those kinds of games, it works out pretty well. I think in a continuing sort of game, you do have to come up with some sort of feel for your environment. And I think what I'm hearing other people say is probably exactly right, that there's kind of two different ways of doing it. You've got your lived-in feel, where both magic and technology have been around so long that really you don't have to worry about explaining why they coexist. It's just you're in a lived-in universe, and I think that that is probably what Star Wars has going for it there. Like, you can talk about Star Wars as being science fantasy, but certainly there's high technology involved, even if it doesn't make maybe a lot of sense. I think probably the most important part is trying to come up with what Dungeons and Dragons calls your bonds, what links you to society, why you care, and having kind of the murder hobo effect of characters, where you've just kind of got everything that kills, can be fun, but I think you do need to think about what your world would look like if you can go to a junkyard and build your robot, as we were talking about earlier. How are things different? You have to imagine that wealthy people are remaining wealthy because they know how to handle that. So you've probably got some kind of police officers who can handle the junkyard dogs of society bothering them, for example. So there's probably things that detect that. There are probably people, just as people might not be very familiar with technology, but they know enough about technology to use a door that opens for them, and they know enough, probably from public service announcements or the fantasy cyberpunk equivalent, that if you see a cyborg, get the hell out of there. It should not be a surprise to people that you have some kind of cyber technology if it's that available. And the same is true of magic. And if both exist in the same game world, you're probably going to need to assume that there's a lot of paranoia, that there are, your local neighborhood is very familiar that both of those things, magic and technology, can be trouble, and that they probably have some kind of training to be able to deal with those situations, at least in the fashion of getting the hell out of there.
That's why Geek the Mage is a very good commentary on Shadowrun.
Okay.
So I appreciate the viewpoint. All right. We
Hey,
actually had
I'm sorry,
we
go ahead.
had another question come up in our chat, and I'm curious on this as well. And it's, excluding YouTubers, who is your favorite RPG advice writer, and what is the greatest inspiration you learned from them? For me, it's not really an RPG advice writer, it's a fantasy novel writer by name of Mercedes Lackey. And I really want to give my characters and NPCs the personalities and feels from reading her stuff. So that was one of my biggest inspirations. So Matt, how about you start this section off?
Yeah, sure. For me, it's definitely Mike Shea. He runs the website slyflourish.com, and he does regular blog posts on different things. But the big thing for me is he writes ebooks about dungeon mastering and about running the game and doing things like that. And he wrote a book called The Lazy Dungeon Master. And I read The Lazy Dungeon Master, I think probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point. And it just completely changed the way I thought about prep and about what I need to focus on going into a game, and like prepping smarter, not harder. You know what I mean? Like just focusing on the things that matter and then trusting myself to improv everything in between. And so I cannot recommend Lazy Dungeon Master enough. It's one of the best books out there on running a game, and he's a great guy. I had the pleasure of actually talking with him and Kirk from PhD 20 at BrigadeCon last year. Really great guy to talk to. He knows the game in and out, all the editions. He's one of the guys that when you're talking to him, you can just tell that he loves the game and he knows it in and out. So definitely check out slyflourish.com. He has great stuff over there.
Awesome. And your comment that actually brought up an interesting point that I've been dealing with recently with trusting myself to improv. And you and Booker are actually my two inspirations on that particular topic. But it's interesting because when I first started DMing, I felt I had to have everything prepped. I had to know exactly what the players would do, etc. And now it's like a total reversal of that. So, Jake, how about you? Do you have a particular RPG advice writer that inspires you?
Mine tends to be more of a personal thing. I was a gentleman that I met early on in my role-playing career that he taught me how to really do sandbox properly by fleshing out NPCs, having goals for everything around the players, and not writing novelizations of it, but just having very basic things that these characters want around the players, and it makes them not only feel more immersed into the area, but also makes it to where you can improv any situation real fast, because all you have to do is ask yourself, what does this NPC want, and how would they react to that? For something more useful to anybody else for reading, I spend a lot of time researching when I'm writing for games, and the Angry DM, if you've ever seen his blogs, they are extraordinarily useful, especially for breaking down very specific, from a beardy dude. He's been around, but he's really funny, sometimes a little bit of coarse language. If that's something problematic, maybe avoid it. But he's really good. I don't agree on all of his points, or a couple things that I disagree with, but it's always good to see somebody's viewpoint, even if it is opposed.
Awesome. How about you, Devin?
My current game world is so much other people's work that it's not even funny. Like, if you could see the list of books that I've read over the past 10 years, and then if you had read all those books and then looked at my game world, it's ridiculous how much of it is not mine. So that's a thing. I'm really big into borrowing ideas from authors that I like, just so that I can share the things that I like about it with other people. And so you'll see a lot of stuff from like Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Rothfuss, Steven Erickson, C.S. Friedman, just all scattered throughout my game world and how it works and how it functions and how it feels. And in particular, I guess out of all those authors, the one I'd really like to point out is Patrick Rothfuss. Not because I take more of my inspiration from him than from anybody else, but just because he inspires me to do things in general, just because he's a really cool person. He does a lot of really cool stuff for people. He has a really big charity for Heifer International, which, you know, gives help to developing countries and stuff. He's just a really neat guy and sort of inspires me to do things just by his, you know, his willingness to help others.
Awesome. Yeah, I think everyone who's really been a DM for a while can say they've taken inspiration from various spots and used other people's ideas and work in some fashion. The thing I do want to point out is if you do it in such a way that it is obvious when you got the inspiration, you should give credit to whoever came up with the content.
I absolutely agree.
If you change something, then you make it your own. So, DBJ, how about you?
Well, quite a few of my inspirations were already stolen, or you guys mentioned. So I'll be a little more specific. One of them is the Angry DM. There's a specifically there's an article that was cribbed from video game design about the 8 types of fun. And as a person who's I'm a very positive. I love creating things rather than tearing things down, and I love it's just type in Angry DM 8 types of fun, and it really goes through how many of us gamers we love different types of gaming, but don't have the language to describe what it is we want and don't want, or what we like and don't like about a particular system, other players, a GM's gaming methods, and often it can boil down to like sometimes pretty brutal name calling and I hate this company. I don't like that particular writer. That player sucks or something. And I like the idea of having a language to describe what it is that you like and don't like. So that's my one shout out to the Angry Dungeon Master 8 types of fun. The second one is a writer, C.S. Friedman. She writes pretty long books. They're 800 plus pages sometimes, but her writing style is extremely fluid, and she has one trilogy, rather old, I think early 90s maybe, called the Coldfire Trilogy. And on her website, she has an article about how she goes about writing her writing style. And one of the things was that very much relates to role-playing is that she says when she makes a world that she writes, she comes up with the rules, and then she tries every method to break it because people in that world would try to break those rules. And so she created this, for example, in her Coldfire trilogy, she has a magic system. Now, nowhere in the book do they ever mention the words magic. The Coldfire trilogy, very simply, is human beings leave Earth, they travel to the edge of the solar system, and they are so far out into the solar system that literally the colony ship is facing the void. Literally, there's no stars. The colony ship must decide, do I land on this last planet, on this last star, or do I travel out into a void where there's literally no stars? So in the ship lands, the people there, and they live 1,000 years. There's no technology. It's very medieval, and they encounter this thing called the Fae. And the Fae is a naturally occurring energy that the conscious and subconscious mind can touch. Well, nothing on the planet has a subconscious until human beings get there. And so this is the reason how some of the creatures and fears that we have become solid in this world. And as you get to the end of the trilogy, you realize that there's more to it than just like goblins and vampires and things, because as these manifestations, as people become more scared of these manifestations, their own subconscious fears and desires and hesitations make them more real. And it's a pretty interesting book about how this Fae becomes like an economy and how it's manipulated. Great writer. I'm sure she went by C.S. Friedman because she's a sci-fi fantasy writer, and women tend not to have as much publicity, but definitely check her out. And lastly, I'd have to say one of our own is Red Dice Diaries. He tends to add a lot to his blog posts, real short little snippets and things, and so I'm always glad to have a little something to read and go, oh, I didn't think about that, or hey, I've thought about that, but it's been a long time since I did consider that. And that's it.
Awesome. How about you, Benjamin?
Yeah, well, I think recently I've been very impressed with Will Wheaton's channel and his Ashes of Volcana We actually get to see him play out these games that are obviously, from his point of view, pretty well scripted, but allow for an amazing amount of player collaboration in the game world. The character creation is very much fluid, and it's like, okay, what does your character have? Oh, it has a cybernetic limb. Okay, well, let's see how you got that, and how would that be? And I think the most important thing that I've gathered from him has been the questions that he asks of his players. They're not only questions of what is your character going to do, but uh, what happens? This is a part of this is the part where you get to make up, what the universe is like, essentially, because it is such a collaborative effort. At least it is in the kind of creative games that I like to play in. So when he asks a player, well, I know that you find something in this magic shop that is very important to you that you want. What is it? In that regard, you really get a bunch of players engaging and determining what the next part of the game is going to be, which I think, for me, is what the point of gaming is that collaborativeness. So, but I really liked his stuff. I definitely recommend taking a look at it and seeing the way that he keeps things going. So look out for it. It's on YouTube.
Can I point out very briefly that the first book of the Coldfire trilogy is what jump-started the world that I use for the Sinlin Trials now. After I read that, I sort of sat down and meditated on what I thought an amazing game world could be from that concept, and that is where all of the Sinlin Trials came from. So that's pretty neat.
Awesome. Let's take a 1 or 2 minute break, refill our drinks, use the restroom, whatever we need to do, and we'll come back and kind of pick up where we left off.
All right.
You guys can go to the bathroom. I'm staying right here.
I'm still here hiding.
Yeah, I enjoyed that Coldfire trilogy. Very, very well done. It's okay. I'm trying to figure out how to describe it and not use like Dungeons and Dragons terms. She uses the way the Fae is used. They consider it like a working, and the magic is worked to create different effects. 99% of it is very subtle, and it flows according to the Earth's crust, right? So if there's a volcano or an earthquake, the Fae will erupt and flow out of, like, say, a crevice or off of a volcano, and it will flow across the ground. Now, 99.9% of the people can't see it unless you're a mage. And when you touch the Fae, it flows, because it flows in a particular direction. What you want to do is extremely dependent upon the flow of the Fae. So if I want to damage you, if it's flowing towards you, I have an easier way of damaging you because I can see the Fae flow towards you. You would have, if it's flowing towards you, you would have a harder time flowing against it to hurt me. But on the other hand, if you want to find out more information about me and detect me, I have a hard time finding information about you because it's flowing towards you and not coming towards me. And then vice versa, if it's flowing towards you, you can find out more details and information about me and what I'm up to and remain hidden far easier. It's done well in the book. I'm not doing it justice.
No,
But
that sounds super interesting. It actually
right.
it adds a good dynamic to where there's almost a tug of war aspect to magical essence. I guess that's not really it because it's a flow of a river upstream and downstream, but
Yes, very much. Like a river flow, and those that can work the Fae actually sometimes have to physically travel in particular directions based on the flow because they don't either they're trying to remain hidden or they want to place themselves in a um, particular location so they have a greater area, greater chance of attacking someone or obscuring, and all the spells are kind of like workings, obscurings, craftings, blessings, wardings or something. And I was like, wow, it's a natural environment. And also, when earthquakes happen, the Fae can be so hot it can burn out your brain. Like literally, when there's an earthquake, every mage stops because they know if they touch it, it'll just there's too much power, so they have to wait for it to die down and the tremors to die down and things like that. And it also flows across the crust of the earth. So if you get in a boat, it flows down into the water, and eventually, if you take a sailing craft far away enough from land, you can't touch the Fae any longer until you reach land again, and it flows back up again. And I was like, well, oh, that's different. And if you go underground, it's above you. The further you go underground, the further away you're away from it. And so it's like, wow, that's how the heck do you put that into a game? So, Devin, I hope you put that into your game world because I'd love to see what that's like.
Not exactly. I took the basic premise of belief. Belief equals magic.
Yes.
And that's really the core. I can't tell you any more without just completely spoiling the meta of my world. But yeah, that's what I took away from it. Belief equals magic.
Um, there's a character in the book similar to one of the characters in Matt's game concerning belief, and it's known as the Hunter, and because belief equals power, this good gentleman sacrificed his family one by one for the sole purpose of trying to help the world out, because technology cannot progress beyond a medieval level because everyone's subconscious is affecting it. So technology cannot get better because affected. So he ends sacrificing his family, thinking that he can help the world out. It's pretty nasty.
Isn't it that sacrifice equals? It's like belief equals the ability to channel magic, but sacrifice equals power. Didn't somebody like?
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to spoil the world, but didn't somebody sacrifice like a lot of stuff to make sure that humans survived? But the end result was the sort of medieval results.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the original colonists, basically. Yeah, he
I got
sacrificed.
this.
Yeah, right. I sacrifice our way to get off this planet, and everyone's like, no. And that's where the adepts, the mages, came from. They were like, okay, we can live here, but we're not leaving. It's pretty interesting.
Well, sounds pretty interesting. Again, it kind of brings up a couple of different possibilities we could touch on with different systems of magic, making magic feel as it's part of the natural environment, things like that. One of my particular interests, and if for those who watch the Fire of World campaign on my channel, we took the magic of Incarnum from 3.5 and basically are working it into a 5e format and kind of just using what we really like about it. And it fits really well out, and it's helped add to more than just arcane and divine magic. Like I know in some of AppTab's supplements they have eminence and other people do stuff with true speech, etc. So what are some things like that you guys use?
Um, Sorry to bring up C.S. Friedman again. In another one of her series, and this makes me think about, in general, role-playing, about the cost of magic. Um, One of her series, or trilogies or something, every magi in the world, whenever they cast a spell, kills one other person just a little bit more. Someone they don't know begins dying. They get sick, they start to get fever, they don't know how to cure it, and I thought that idea was very interesting. Like, from simply a role playing standpoint, not necessarily a gaming like die roll kind of thing, but if every person that casts magic, one other person begins to die every time you do it, and that's the cost it takes to cast magic, like, what kind of person would voluntarily choose to live that kind of lifestyle, and how would other people tolerate it if they found out about it? You know, would a city that's, grand and lawful, and they found out that they're, great magi who've protected the city for, 10 generations, you find out that yeah, the cost of your safety is we kill somebody, to make the grass grow and to have, you know, crops that are always, full and lush and things like that. So I like to, I think for myself, the one thing that I find missing from, um, is the cost of magic, whether you have to make a bond with another planar creature, whether you're sacrificing part of your life, or that maybe there's something that you cannot do any longer. You can never visit a particular land, or um, dress a certain way, or say certain words, or I kind of look at magi like monks, like you're giving up one part of your life to get this other power, and that's something that I don't really see or mentioned in gaming books.
My favorite magic system, bar none, is Warhammer 40,000 and the Fantasy. They both use a very similar one, which is magic is extraordinarily dangerous. It's not even referred to as magic generally, unless you're talking to like low peons. But the idea is that all psychic abilities are pulled from a dimension known as the warp. And the warp is, to grossly oversimplify it, is the embodiment of sentient emotion, so such as rage, lust, things like that. So when you're pulling from this dimension, you run the risk at every single time that you do it, no matter how powerful your training is, something observes you back and taps into you. To the point to where it could be something very minor, where the walls start to bleed, reality starts to tear, to the worst in cases, which could be demonic incursions, where entities from this other realm actually break into reality and start ruining everyone's day, or you actually become possessed by these other entities. So psychers, as they're referred to as, or basically magic users, are seen as tainted, and it can actually warp this how they perceive the world and how people perceive them. It's very dangerous in that setting.
In the world that I've created. Wait, no, it's not my turn.
Oh, that's fine. Go ahead.
All right, sorry. There isn't a price for, well, there is a price for magic, but nobody knows about it yet. The big one that most people learn about is the price of resurrection. And basically it is that once you die, you're supposed to stay dead. And there is magic, there are ways to bring people back to life, but the more impactful that person is on the flow of the world, basically, the flow of the timeline, the more damage you do to the timeline when you bring them back. You basically make it shorter. And how that happens is they bring back with them, when they come back, knowledge of something horrible and or progressive will come into the world. Like, that's how gunpowder was invented in my world, basically. They brought back somebody really powerful, and when they did, it skipped forward, and somebody discovered gunpowder and how to apply it to weapons, and thus human life became just that little bit less, a little bit less enduring.
Awesome. Um, how about how about you, Jake?
Yeah, I kind of touched on it with the 40K stuff, but the Magic in general, uh, I think there needs to be a cost. General fantasy, or rather general high fantasy, such as D&D and Pathfinder, I feel that Magic is kind of willy-nilly. We were talking about previously the setting that talked about, casting light in various lampposts and things like that. Very interesting concept. I think it's very cool, but that also shows that magic could potentially not be taken seriously if it's so mundane and everyday use. And I like the idea of magic being something that the common man uh, doesn't have access to, and so therefore can be feared or respected. It's personal preference. There's place for everything, though, obviously.
To kind of go back to the cyberpunk question, deal with this as well. Um, I think one of the things that when mixing technology and magic is that uh, we tend to presume that technology is pretty readily available. Um, I could buy a gun, I can get in a car, I can get cyberware, and that magic itself has a cost that technology only has. The cost is money and finding somebody, to buy it, and getting across to players who may feel that they're far more into the special snowflake arena, that when you start talking about making technology, like, for example, Everon and such, that your character in and of themselves are special, but the world is completely aware of how special you are, right? So in our modern day, if we had cyborgs and mages and stuff, anything that they would do at all in any way would be completely surprising. People would just, they'd run for cover. Our society would not know how to handle it at first. But in Shadowrun, in Everon, in place, those kind of settings, Warhammer, yeah, you have, as a player character, maybe you have access to more of these things, but you're, no offense to the player, but you're not that special. Yeah, you have a cyber arm, but there's a cyber arm, you know, company. They make these things. There are doctors who are, they're used to, oh, we've seen that model 2 years ago, getting that across to players and is, I think sometimes can be a little difficult because they're expecting them to be so far above and beyond the norm. And lastly, I'll say this as a game master, one thing that kind of, it doesn't rub me the wrong way, but one of the things that is a huge assumption is that technology is always better than any, like, for example, a gun ruins magic because guns are always more powerful. And my feeling is, why would we make that assumption? Gary Gygax decided that a longsword does D8 damage, so we now assume that a longsword does D8 damage, but where did that number come from? Who's to say that a pistol does not do the exact same amount of damage? And because we have access to, man, modern weaponry is so powerful and so dangerous. Well, sure, because we've never seen dragons before. We've never seen someone casting spells. So from a game master's point of view, when someone says, well, firearms are going to ruin the world, I'm thinking, well, not if I have anything to do with it. I can tell. I'm the person controlling the game. I decide how much damage they do, how much protection they are, and how much access the players and the world has to those items. So I would say anyone who's reluctant to blend or mix those kind of things, like, no, dude, it's your game. Mix it as much as you want, whether you trickle it in or blend it completely together, like Shadowrun has done, and decide on what a baseline is, and just stick with it.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is what you just hit on with having a baseline. I think that's where homebrewing and adding different types of magic, technology, etc. That really comes but it down to the heart of it is you have to have a consistent baseline. So we have another question in our live stream, AIM, about what is the next big thing in RPG tabletop gaming. So I'm curious as to hear everyone's viewpoints. The next big thing I would love to see, I don't think more is technology quite there yet, but imagine the holodeck of like Star Trek and being able to do our sessions and using that kind of virtual reality. That to me would be like the pinnacle of the big thing for RPGs.
That's what I was going to say is like, I feel like every year we think that technology is going to be catching up to what we want to do with RPGs, whether it's, something simple like having my character sheet on an iPad and I can, do different things with my character sheet and put different statuses on my character using the iPad and things like that. But I think that's really where RPGs will just flourish, is this idea of like augmented reality and virtual reality. We have these VR headsets coming out that are lighter, they're more affordable, they fully like encompass you and they make you feel like you're someplace else. And I think it would be really cool to have that sort of holodeck sort of feel that you're talking about, Jaren. And I also love the idea of like augmented reality using holograms and things like that in real space. Like if I'm running a game in person and I can use my hands to sculpt a map, that would be so cool. Or bring up an image, like a holographic image of an orc or something, like that. When I think about that, and I think about the fact that that's really not too far off. We have augmented reality, we have virtual reality. Somebody just needs to implement it into an RPG. Like I get really excited about that because the possibilities are like limitless.
Exactly. How about you, Jake? What do you think the next big thing of RPGs is going to be or should be?
Well, I would say we're right on the cusp of one that we've been utilizing, which is platforms such as Roll20, Tabletop Simulator, things like that. I think that brings people together and has made this hobby so much larger and given us more of a community to work with and made it work with finding players of your ilk. So you're not stuck with the people that are around you. We've all had that where you have the 5 people that you want to play with, but they tend to be maybe the munchkin, maybe the narrative focus, and it just doesn't meld. Whereas in platforms such as Roll20 or Tabletop Simulator allow you to find your best group. For the next thing, I think kind of more of a nuts and bolts thing instead of technologically. I think we're seeing a surge of streamline. I think role-playing games have gotten into they're getting on an age. So we're to the point where we're no longer trying to reinvent the wheel or being the best around. We're getting to the point where we're streamlining everything. D&D 5th Ed shows this very well, that the system has condensed. The focus of the game is no longer mechanical. And I know there's a lot of people that love the mechanical aspect, and I don't mean to take away from them, but a lot of people are here for the story elements, and these are merely tools to get to those story elements. So I think we're going to see a surge of a lot more systems following this suit, and I think that's the next step of a focus on a narrative rather than mechanics.
Uh, awesome. How about you, Devin?
I think the next big thing is something we've already started to see, certainly, but I think it will get bigger, and that is tabletop in the mainstream due to broadcasts of people playing it and enjoying it and showing how it should be done. Uh, really sort of personified by PAX East and Critical Role. They've really shown that you can take this thing that all of us know is an amazing hobby, make it entertaining, show people that it's not a thing that really needs to be made fun of or scoffed at, and that it's something that everybody can enjoy. And I think that will grow larger before as time goes on. I think that's really the only thing I could see in the near future, though holograms would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I definitely think we're heading in the right direction with a lot of the games being streamed online for viewing audiences, is along with different things that the DMs do, like this panel, for example. So, DBJ, what's your thoughts on the next big thing?
Um, I have to agree with all of you guys. I think um, along the lines of streamlining, I see a lot of games now. They are not systems; they're like frameworks. So there's like powered by the apocalypse, powered by fate, um, those kind of games where they are like 90% games, and uh, because of so many creative people, they can take the game, hack their 10%, and then label it as, World War II plus werewolves, or Renaissance period plus mecha, or something like that. And so I think we're going to see a lot of that. But the one thing I think we're going to see is living worlds. And I'm guesstimating this on this. And what I mean by living worlds um, are game systems where uh, not just the rules, but the setting will grow in conjunction in near real time with the people playing it. Um, so, for example, Forgotten Realms, as using that as a big one, people who are into the Forgotten Realms are very much into which time period things happen and when they happen, and we have to wait until the next release or the writers do something to update that. Well, I think what's going to happen, my prediction is that when you buy a game, you may be able to find out what's happening in the setting the next year, because it'll happen in real time. Players will be able to input to the game designers. The game designers will update things. Hey, in this post-apocalyptic world, New York got nuked. It wasn't nuked in the original book. It's nuked now. Here's the new rules. This is what happened. Chicago's wiped off the map. Refugees are living in Madagascar. This is the new part. Boom, here you go. You guys purchased the book. You spent, I don't know, $50 last year. Here's $3. Here's the new setting material. Without the rules, and as players play, they will get more input into the creators. So because now, instead of it being 4 or 5 steps away, now creators are players, designers are players, and they're getting that information. But what I'd love to see, my dream is that we see so many little pieces scattered around that I would love to see at the gaming table. For example, SimCity. Just the SimCity ability to create the original SimCity, where you could create landscapes and things. I would love to have that at my table. I want to point and click and put a mountain here and rivers there, and in real time, and boom, here you go, guys. Here's my map. And NPCs. When you put in a video game, hey, here's the skin to make my character. I wish that was just being able to skin a character and have that as my PC or my NPC, with a couple of point clicks, drags for facial expressions, size, gender, and post it up very quick, real time, I think would be another tool
Yeah,
that I'd
there,
love to see.
there are actually some things like that already out. There are some living role campaigns going on
Mm-hmm.
Roll20. There's the Epic Character Generator, or that you pretty much can point and click options, and which produces some really nice avatar and images for characters. So we're already seeing some of this stuff start to flourish, and I think it's only going to get better with time. How about you, Benjamin? What do you think the next big thing is or should be?
Well, I think we're going to see more trend, the trend continue that social media has provided over the last 2 decades. I think we're going to see people connecting more with the kind of gamers that they're comfortable with, but we're also going to see them be able to connect with people who they wouldn't otherwise ever come into contact. So people are going to have a greater variety if they're looking for it. Um, I wish I knew what was going to replace Facebook because I'm sure I could make a lot of money, investing in whoever's going to do it. But whatever that is also going to be a technological advancement in role-playing games as well, and give us that way to connect with the people we want to connect with, give us that many chances to connect with people we wouldn't connect with otherwise. I think it's going to be great because there's going to be more ideas that are going to be out there, more settings, more concepts, more types of players. If you have a group who isn't working for you in your local area, you're probably going to find these other groups. I think in some ways that we're going to get more isolated because of that, but at the same time, I think that's going to be a trend towards understanding our fellow man better, which is, pretty good from a humanitarian point of view.
Awesome. We have a question by Don Forgecast that I'll be asking in a second. And then after that, we'll cover maybe one other topic kind of decided on among all the DMs, stuff they kind of wanted to talk about, and kind of pick one. And then we'll give Devin a chance as a player to ask the DMs gathered here some question from a player viewpoint that would be beneficial to other players who are looking maybe to understand the DMs better, where the DMs are coming from, things like that. So John Forgecast's question is, where do you draw the line between role building and ease of play? He gave an example. He developed the 32 sphere system that breaks down magic spells and effects into different realms. And then he says, neat, cool, fun to play. So kind of where is that line between building the world and making it easy to play in for your players? And we'll begin with Matt.
For me, I try to err on the side of making things as easy as possible for players that don't necessarily have the time or commitment to learn new systems, new house rules, new things like that. If I'm building a new world and I want to do kind of a different take on maybe some fantasy races, I want to have some elves and some dwarves, but I want them to be a little bit different. I might not change anything about them mechanically. It'll all be how I portray them, their society, their culture, because that won't necessarily change the mechanics. To me, the important part is how things are portrayed and how things are presented. I have Kror, this kind of savage sword and sorcery setting that I like to run games in from time to time, and it's very much survival based. It's very much like kind of grim and dark, and it's very much personal sort of stories rather than these grand sweeping sort of epic quests. And for me, I didn't change anything mechanically to make Kror come across that way. It's more so how I narrate, how I present things, what the NPCs are like that the players interact with. But the different races that are on Kror, even though they're very different than you would find in a standard sort of generic fantasy game, they're the same stat-wise. They don't have anything different about them. And same with the classes. And I didn't want to restrict any classes either. And so, I might present the players with, here's what a druid is like on Kror. Here's what a wizard is like on Kror. And kind of don't, present them with a bunch of different things that they have to contend with, but more so just here's how things are different on this world, but it's not mechanical. So I hope that makes sense.
Awesome. Jake?
Yeah, I really like what Matt was pointing out, the races and classes and how they affect your world, and that's a really good one. I would also say that when it comes to world building, front load sparingly. Make sure that any description that you give to your players is very short and very concise. The easiest way to lose your players is to monologue. I am a man of few words when I can. I would also say that no matter what you're talking about in your world building, do your best to connect it to your players' characters. If you're talking about something that your player characters are not going to interact with or have nothing to do with the character's backstory, it's probably not something you should be talking about. This is a story about their characters, so focus on that, and that keeps the world building to a lot more focused aperture, to where you're dealing with things that are important now or relatively soon. Additionally, feel free to wing it. When it comes to something and somebody asks you a question, fill it in. And if they go, well, that doesn't really make sense to what happened four sessions ago, you're like, yeah, that's weird, isn't it? Fill in the gaps later. That's where the best intrigue comes from, when you're like, well, how do I get myself out of this corner I've painted myself? And then it's going to be the thing that everybody talks about for the next few sessions. Like, well, I wasn't expecting that. And secretly you're like, I also was not expecting that. You don't tell them because, they don't get that part.
Awesome. How about you, Devin?
I actually tend to err on sort of a split. I do get really into my world building, and I tend to make it pretty... Oh, wait, rules. Rules! Is it world or rules?
It's role building.
Oh, rule. Okay. Actually, I do tend to prefer simpler. Keep it quick. Though I do like to use as many of the rules as I can to keep the game balanced. Like, keep short rests and long, and as 5e is an example, keep short rests like an hour, keep long rests 8 hours, because that's going to keep your adventuring party moving forward. It's going to keep spellcasters from really taking the spotlight and having all this stuff to throw around. And other than that, I don't homebrew. I just tend to reskin a lot. Yeah, I just take things, modify them a little bit, and so instead of fighting a troll, you might fight somebody with the stats of a troll, or some such.
Awesome. How about you, DBJ?
Yeah, I have to mirror everything that's been said. I like to keep things very simple. Honestly, I'm like maybe a 3 to 5% prepper. Everything else is just random. And although in defense of those who do not prep, I will say that in effect the prep is done in a far different way. Most long-time GMs or GMs that do not prep actually have a lot of tools. They have a lot of toolbox. They have their top 5 NPCs they go to, their top 6 creatures, their top 5 encounters, and they keep them in their head and they keep them in their back pocket, and they know when to pull those out. I also like to keep things very personal, so when players have something in their background, as was mentioned before, tie it to their background. I also like to bring up when a player has, whenever they act or react in the world, to constantly refer back to their action or reaction. If they left coins on the table and for a drink or something, I'll make a mention that the waiter waves to them on the street. Hey, thanks, thanks for leaving me a tip or something. And then maybe that waiter comes back to them with a piece of information, or the players, attack the orcs. They go get back into town, and a little boy is like looking at them and looking at their blood-spattered armor or something. And then when they leave town, the kid's like painted his outfit to look like their blood splatters or something. I like to keep things extremely small and personal. And lastly, I would say that I like to show, not tell. I've gotten burned on over prepping so much over the years. Whole worlds that are never explored. Sometimes players, you leave breadcrumbs because you want them, as a world builder, you want them to please go in the cave, go into the desert. Will you please go up the mountains? I placed all this great stuff in the mountains. Go up there. And the players are like, nah, I'm just going to go back to town. Yeah, that's all right. I'm going to go to visit the blacksmith in the tavern. I'm thinking, no, go everywhere in town. Please, poke stuff, trip over things. Sometimes that is just as bad as the people who want to burn your whole world down. So I like to show, not tell. One of the things that plug in part of the supplement I have is a thing called pressure. And so now I more or less fall on the side of creating pressure tactics. If players sit still, what pressures are going to impact them? If they go to town and they say, I'm not leaving the tavern, I'm just going to sit here and drink a beer, down this grog, how will the world continue on? And so, in effect, my world building is by emotion. This country wants to advance because they're angry. This country is defending itself against, a horde of something that's otherworldly. And then as the players start stumbling around this world, their actions will act or react depending on the pressures around them. Maybe the country that's defending themselves is saying, hey, you need to help us defend ourselves. And the players are going, I don't have any loyalty to you. Well, now that country's like, well, if you're not for us, you're against us. Maybe there's another country that's the evil horde, and they're going in. They're like, hey, you should pillage that town with us. And I don't feel like pillaging that town. Well, then the players, that horde may say, well, if you're not for us, you're against us. So now they're stuck in the middle. So I tend to fall on smaller stories and creating a lot of pressure tactics to get them to jumpstart and do something.
Awesome. I believe Jake had a minor addition to add before we go to Benjamin.
Yeah, so talking about players not going and venturing where you'd left the breadcrumbs, I'm running multiple sessions every week, and I have a good friend of mine that's in one of those games, and I always tell him bounce ideas off him, and he doesn't know if I'm bouncing ideas for his game or for other ones. So I mentioned the building of a water temple after I was watching a YouTube video about top 10 worst dungeons in Legend of Zelda, and I was like, I could do that well. And he's like, oh boy, water temple, that sounds terrible. And then in a recent session, the party actually found the entrance to said water temple, and the whole time he's just like, no, you didn't do this to me. I can't believe you just did it to me. So he's being a good sport about it, but he was definitely railing against joining in. But always good to have players that are willing to set aside their own personal bias.
Yeah. Okay. So Benjamin, how do you draw the line between world building and ease of play?
Yeah, I am a very creative person, and I think when I have the muse to create and no one's around, I like to come up with stuff about the backgrounds that I'd like to see happen. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm just a font of ideas, so I might have 10 or 12 ideas before I get to the actual gaming group or some people to talk it over with. It's important, I think, to realize that it's not your game as a game master, that it's the game, it's everybody's game who's playing. That it's a collaborative effort, and so yeah, maybe you're like me, and you could easily spend 10 hours in a weekend, just thinking about whatever it is that's sparking your creative juices that week. Um, but if you get too attached to those ideas, um, it can be very very bad when players inevitably decide they want to do something else. You got to remember it's not just your world. It's what are they going to want to do with that? How do you include them? So as far as the world building goes, I'd like to just throw it out there, but I think uh, you probably have to be prepared, like I think it was DBJ who was saying, 3 to 5% preparation. I think you have to be fine with if you have like 90% of your game already mapped out before you start playing. You have to realize that you're going to lose like 80% of that because you're merely one of the participants. You are collaborating with those other players, and they're going to go in directions you hadn't thought of, and they're going to have fun, and that's what you need to support.
O- Okay, one of the things I actually do for ease of play is I set a very generic setting, whether it's a forest, the local town or village, and I don't really worry so much about the world. I'll give them maybe one bit of information before we start the session on this is a major event in the world. And I do a lot of things that I've seen other DMs do. I believe Bunker and Matt and Tim have all used this, where they ask the players, they'll say something like, you see the symbol of an animal engraved on a door. Tell me, what is this animal? And you let the players build it. And by kind of collaborating in that way to build your world, it's an easy play because you're doing it as you play, and the players understand what it is you're doing, and because they're helping to make it. So that's really how I kind of been driving the line a lot lately. So let's decide on the topic together to talk about real quickly. A, a topic that is very dear to my heart in RPGs is the level of narration and description. And, and so that would be my first vote, or is how to basically make the players feel like this is really happening and totally immerse themselves into that scene. So, Matt, what's a topic you're particularly interested in?
Something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is it's kind of like a metagame topic, but it's how do you get yourself psyched up for a game? Because I find myself every single game that I run leading up to it, I get really anxious. And there's no reason for me to be anxious. I know the game is going to go fine. I know the players are going to be great. I know that I'm going to have a good time. I know as soon as I start doing my opening narration that I'm going to feel like all that anxiety is just going to leave. But I end up still just kind of pacing around, just waiting for the game to start, just kind of being like, oh man, just getting all kind of unnecessarily hyped up about it. And so I guess I'm interested if anyone has any like pre-game rituals or things that they do before the game to just kind of like relax and go into the game feeling good and feeling confident.
Okay. How about you, Jake?
If I had to pick one thing, I would say let's go light. If there's a specific IP that you really enjoy, such as Star Trek, Star Wars, anything out there, but you absolutely could not see yourself role-playing in that setting. I find that happens to me a lot.
Okay. Devin?
I can get behind the narration discussion because that's something that I know quite a bit about. Not being able to use like pictures and whatnot, you know.
Yeah. Okay. DBJ?
This kind of goes along the idea of narration. I wanted to talk about the level of player agency. It's a big thing. There are a lot of game systems that have specific core rules that give players a lot of agency in the game. Fate is the first one that pops into my mind, but there are many others. Dungeons & Dragons 5e has inspiration, which has some narrative effects possible in various games. But so I would go with that. But I too have the eternal jitters when beginning a game. I'm a nervous player. I like to stand. I like to walk around. I get animated, and I find it difficult to do it online because my instinct is to talk over people. So I really rein myself back in because I want to. I'm a cheerleader, and so when I'm destroying the players, I'm like, yes, hey, I'm going to take you out. When the players are acting, I'm their cheerleader. Dude, go ahead. Okay, you can do this or that. You know what? You have a greater chance of doing this action. Not because I want to see my world destroyed, but I want to see them shine because they're the stars. And so it's weird because I feel like I'm a coach. Like, okay, but I'm not supposed to be. So I have this nervous energy in me. Like, okay, I want to get this started. I get more antsy because I want to get into the middle of the game and I have to friggin' start it. And I hate that awkward beginning period. So I do the Star Wars /007 method, and I just throw people like right into the action. You're in a speeding car. There's a helicopter shooting at you. Go. You know, you guys are running through the forest. You're being chased by this thing. Go. You're in a ship. It's storm tossed you, but go. Like, to me, I like those beginnings. But I understand from a player's point of view how much they dislike that. So that's what I maybe that's not clear, but that's what I like to talk about.
Okay. Okay. Benjamin, how about you?
I think I'd like to talk about the narration and description, but I'd also like to, as a part of that, if there's some way we can get some gamers who may not be as interested in role-playing to actually play their characters with some emotion sometimes. Some players do a really good job of showing their character is angry in a particular situation, but I think the depth sometimes of characters, I'd like to see more of that, and I think that has to do with the mood. And so I guess I'd add mood to the question of how do you make narration and description, how do you make it players feel a certain way because you want, obviously you want the characters to feel a certain way and you want them as an audience to feel a certain way.
Sorry about that. I was muted.
Okay.
I was saying it sounds like there's two basic topics, and one of them is pretty quick. So let's do this where we talk about maybe one thing we do as a pregame ritual to kind of help with the nerves, and then go into our opinions and viewpoints on narration, description, and you can include player agency with that as well. For me, and I've said it in several of my videos, I watch the Provokers, Winds of Sicily. I watch Esper the Bird's videos, and that's basically the half hour to 45 minutes before any session I run. And it's also about 90% of my total prep is just inspired by myself and by watching these things that I love, that players and the DMs do so good at. It's almost like instantly I'm trying to be better than they are. And for me, that just kicks the nerves out the window. So for narration and description, what was that, Benjamin?
Oh, I heard you talk about certain videos, and I think you gave the name of it, something Bard, and I just didn't hear the first part. What are the names of them? I'm curious.
Esper the Bird. He's on YouTube. Yes, thank you, Matt, for putting it into the chat. He's very much a descriptive and narration person. He's probably my #1 go-to for narration and detail, for inspiration, and just because of how in-depth he does. And for me, this narration and description's mandatory for a good session. There's a big difference between saying you go into a swamp and you're entering into this overgrown, wet, bog-like terrain. It smells dank and dark. It gives almost a whole different feel. Just by bumping up the narration and description that little bit. So, Matt, how about you? What's something you do to try to deal with the jitters, and then kind of your viewpoint on narration, description, how it can be done better?
So something that I've been trying to do recently is previously, like leading up to a game, I look at my notes, I do last minute prep, I look through the monster manual, make sure I understand all of that. But I found that that was actually making me a little bit more anxious because my mind was just on the game, just thinking about the game. And so what I've been trying to do lately is do something completely different, like leading up to the game, like just stop thinking about it for an hour or 2 hours. I will work out, lift weights, go for a walk, watch something on TV, read a book, watch a movie, something like that, just to get my mind elsewhere so that I'm not sitting there dwelling on, oh, I haven't thought about this, or I haven't thought about this, what if this happens? It's like, I don't have to worry about any of that. So I'm trying to be better about that, and I think it's working for me, especially if I'm doing something active, if I go for a walk or something, because then that nervous energy has someplace else to go, instead of just like roiling around in my brain. So that's been good. In terms of narration and player agency, for me, I think that there's a certain point you can get to where you can over-narrate or over-describe things, and there's no longer a clear picture because there's no important aspects that are sticking out in the player's mind. For me, I like to try to do like 2 or 3 big things. Pick a few of the senses. Think about what something smells like, what it looks like, if there's any distinguishing features about the object or the NPC or the place that they're looking at and experiencing, and trusting the player's imagination to fill in the blanks. You know, there's that movie Inception where they create the level and then the person's subconscious fills it with everything else. And that's sort of RPGs. That's sort of how RPGs work. You set the stage and you allow the person's subconscious to fill it up. Like, it's okay if your player's image of what they're looking at doesn't match yours perfectly. In fact, it shouldn't. Allow their imagination to fill in the blanks that you intentionally leave there, like leave some breathing room for that to happen, and they'll see it that much more vividly, because instead of trying to reconcile what you're describing, they're latching on to the few little tidbits that you gave them and then filling in the blanks with their own imagination, and that just works out better, I think.
Exactly. I think that's a very good point, not to over-narrate, because I've known DMs who tell you where every tree, every rock is in an area. And that really takes away a lot of the player agency to say, okay, I look and see a tree 10 feet away, I'm going to run over to it, climb up it, things like that. And a lot of these things, and I'm sure Devin will bring this up, you can say there's a large boulder nearby. And I don't have to say anything more than that for the player to picture a large boulder. The color of it's up to them, the shape can be up to them, unless it's important how it's shaped or some other detail, then you want to include that. So, Jake, how about you?
Well, for pregame, I'm quite the opposite of Matt, actually. I will, especially if it's like a session one or something like that, I will go over my notes over and over again to make sure that I have it right. That makes me feel prepared, and then when I go into it, I feel like I have the capabilities to keep my audience attention. I also, for non-session ones, what I really like to do to get my blood moving and get everybody involved is I let a player do the recap of the last session. I find that gets everybody immediately in the mode. Like, all right, okay, what did happen last time? That player has to figure it out. Everybody else adds in, oh, well, you missed that, and it gives me a second to, because a lot of times I might not have taken the note on what minor things that happened, so they remember it because it was what their character did, and it's very useful. For narrative, I'm totally about quick narration. If you can't say it in a few sentences, either you don't understand it or it's not worth talking about. You need to get it out there and get back to the players talking, because the more time the players are talking, the more time everybody's having fun. I think timbre and how you describe something really changes it. If you're very fast and erratic when you say something, it's going to get that energy built up inside the players. Whereas if you're slow and mellow, it'll change how your players react to the situation. Music can help. I do a lot of online role playing, so adding the music in the background at a very low amount can help a lot with them. I allow my players to narrate some stuff. For instance, different attacks, different things they do. I'm very much into when they cast spells. Like, well, how does that look? How do people react to it? And that helps build the kind of around the character and the casters. When somebody swings their sword, well, do you just attack with your long sword? How does that happen? I'm very open to allowing players to add things to the setting. So, for instance, if they're like, hey, is there a rock around that I could find? Or is there tufts of grass that I could grab? Or is there a building that I could climb up? It's like, yeah, that's fine. That's perfectly acceptable. Adding the player's ability to add into it really helps them get focused in and having a contributing part. For the emotional aspects, I really think making sure that you tie everything directly to characters is very important to get that emotional tie. This doesn't mean kill everybody in their backstory, But there are things that you can do with characters or settings in people's backstories to evoke that emotional connection. Maybe they're having, their father's having difficulty figuring something out, or a character that they previously thought was dead turns out not to be dead. Things like that can evoke an emotional response, especially over long periods of campaigns. Additionally, if you have, because I think there was a tinge of it when the topic was brought up, about incentivizing players to be more narrative and be more into describing things, I'm definitely all in the book for incentivizing it. The D&D 5th Ed did this really well with inspiration. If a character makes a growth point where they decide that they're going to bury the hatchet between another player, or they're going to grow past a certain issue that they had, that's worth an inspiration every single time for me. And then role-playing experience points. I know that's a touchy subject for a lot of people, but when I give out role-playing experience, the way I do it is that I give whatever somebody earns, it earns for the entire party. That breeds everybody wanting to work together to talk about and role-play backstory. I have, ever since I adopted that, I have a lot more where my players will sit there for 30 minutes at a time just having conversation as their characters, which is very rewarding for me in hearing that growth in their characters, because that's the time that they start asking themselves the questions and get more emotionally attached to said characters.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually remember one session where you bring it up how players sit back and talk and the characters for a long time. One of my favorite sessions I've had was an 8-hour session by DM July. The entire time I said 6 words. The rest of the time they were around a campfire and they were figuring out what to do next, and that was just them role playing back and forth this conversation.
8 hours. You are a stronger man than me, sir.
Oh, I loved it. I just sat there listening to the entire time. It was a blast. So, I believe that brings us to Devin. And what's some things you do, Devin, to deal with pre-game jitters, and then talk a little bit about the narration angle?
Well, for pregame jitters, what I do is I prep anywhere from 90% of the session to 15% of the session. It just depends on what the players are doing and how crucial this particular scene that I want to get across is going to be. Like, I might have every room of a castle completely described with box text and traps and everything just set and ready, and all I have to do is follow the numbers as they go through it. Or I might be making it up on the fly. It just completely depends. But for pregame jitters, I want to say 85 to 90% of my prep done before the day of. And on the day of, about an hour before, I'll sit down, look at all my prep, and I'll spend an hour just writing what I think my intro might be, and clarifying little points and stuff to myself, just to kind of get myself in the DM mindset and distract myself for that hour. And that's generally how I deal with the pregame nervousness. On the topic of narration, I tend to be a little narration heavy. That's mostly because I have to give out descriptions for things that I can't provide pictures for. But I think the only time I really spill over into too much is when I'm trying to describe detailed maps of regions. Because a map's a really easy thing to look at. You can look top down, you see the mountains over there, you see the river going through the middle. But all of those things, if you include the names and where they're at, get really jumbled really quickly in a monologue dump. And so that's something that I have to work with. I have ways to build really basic maps. I go through and I measure out in a text file like 20, what are they called? 20 cells by 20 cells or 25 cells by 25 cells. And then I type letters and make a big square, and then provide a key as to what the letters are, and I can kind of make a map that way, but it's really time consuming and involves a lot of counting on my end.
Okay.
As for player agency, when I'm crafting a campaign, I have a timeline, and all the things that are going to be going on in that world without the player agency. And then as they go through, they will change the timeline, and I will update it and give them choices as to where to progress from there. I usually give them 3 or 4 choices in character, actually. Like, there will be in character reasons that kind of cajole them into going one of 4 directions, and they can pick it, and as they progress through the story, they directly affect the game world. It's sometimes, in my opinion, it feels a little heavy-handed because I would like to go more sandbox, but a true sandbox game is very, very difficult to keep forward momentum. And so I tend to go with the multiple choice, choose your own adventure type thing.
Okay. Awesome. DBJ.
All right. Well, first, I love everything you guys said, and but I'm going to be a little bit different. My pregame prep is just like watching like my favorite clips from like YouTube or movies or something, like the last fight scene of Equilibrium, or like the highway scene from the second Matrix movie or something like that. Like, throw in Lord of the Rings again for like the 200th time because I need to vacuum the floor and I want to watch something. I'm a very visual, cinematic. I like things moving. I like a lot of moving parts. Scenery moving. I love exotic locations. So my prep tends to, I've found, wants to put me in the mood. I'll throw in Captain America, Winter Soldier or something like that, and watch a scene where he's throwing the shield and fights the shield helicarrier, not helicarrier, the ship or something that was trying to stop him. And he does the backflip off the the motorcycle or something like that. And for some reason, I found that not calms me, but it's like an instruction manual. Like, oh, okay, this is the tone I want to set. This kind of action I want to see. Now, as far as player agency goes, there's a couple of things I want to say. This is not directed towards you guys, really. It's actually directed more towards the audience. I have to mirror everything said. I have to very much agree with it. But I'm going to say that my big advice for player agency is never have closed doors. And I don't mean physically closed doors, but oftentimes when we get in a creative method, like, hey, this is my game world, if you put too much detail, your players, you write down how many trees, how many boulders, what's in the room, and a player says, oh, hey, I'd like to, I'm going to pick up a bottle off the tavern counter and take a swig. And if I say, well, there are no bottles on the counter, the more I say no, you can't, no, it isn't, no, it's not possible, it doesn't exist, the more doors I close. And it gets to the point where the players will close their own doors and not engage in your world. So if a player says, hey, I want to grab a bottle off the bar, yes, there is a bottle in the bar, and yes, you take a swig. You don't have to ask me permission. Some players will say, hey, is there a half-filled bottle? I'm going to take a drink. Sure, yes, I'm going to say yes, because for me, that commitment to the world means they want to engage in it. They want to touch something. They want to press buttons. They want to trip over things. I'm going to give them the opportunity. So my big advice is don't close doors. Also, when you start closing doors, you don't leave options for your players to do something, because most of the time when they ask you if something exists, there's something behind that. Hey, is there a back alley? Well, because they have plans on maybe climbing a wall, or attacking, a passerby, or changing into a disguise, or they plan on doing something else. So if I say no, there's no back alley, when I say no too often, that closes the door. But the other thing for player agency I would like to add is that players should understand there's a term called yes and. And yes and doesn't mean yes, complete permission to do what you want. Yes and is just a run-on sentence that the game master and all the other players are allowed to add on to. So if a player says, I'm going to grab the bottle off the bar and I'm going to slam someone in the head with it, and I'm going to, well, that's not exactly how player agency works. Player agency is much like an actor in a movie. You have every potential to go pick props out of the prop room, but you're not allowed to change, the script. You can't stop what the director's doing. So my advice to players is you have player agency, but if it involves changing the numbers or guiding the story, the game master always has veto rights to go into it. So in a very bad example would be a player says, well, since I have player agency, I'm going to go visit my dad because he's got that +5 Vorpal flaming blade that he always has above the mantle. Well, me as the game master, I can say, sure, you head over to your dad's house and this happens. Or you go there, the door's locked, you look inside and no one's home. It looks like all the furniture's gone. Because there's a yes and these other things happen. So yes and does not mean you have complete permission. It means yes and I'm adding a story element. Oh, how does the story progress? It does not end. Lastly, I have to give a big shout out to a game by Andrew Wood, the main man, Within the Ring of Fire, for one little blurb in a very good role-playing game, and that's the soliloquy. I feel that player descriptions, both physically, what they do in combat, what they do socially, and what they mention emotionally, how they feel about something, or when they reflect on an event, is every bit as important as a dice mechanic. And I reward that just as heavily as a dice mechanic. So I think one thing that players are afraid of is if they engage in those things, the mechanics of the game will punish them for doing so. So I'll give it just an example. If a player is playing, say, a paladin or something, and they say, as the orcs surround me, I kneel down, get down on one knee, close my eyes, and place my sword into the ground and pray to my god for pressure or something. Me as a game master, I will refuse to. I'm not going to punish them for being prone. I'm not going to punish them for having their eyes closed. I'm not going to punish them for having their sword in the ground. That's all completely descriptive. That is a story element. My job as the game master is not to implement every rule all the time, but to know when to pick my battles and when to use the rules. So if a player adds that into the game, that's descriptive flavor. I'm not going to punish that, because if I do so, that player will never ever do that again. So description please go ahead.
Goes with the general, and I say the number one rule of any RPG is whether to have fun. And if you have to say no, or you punish them by using that mechanic for something they're doing, that they're having fun doing it, but then they get punished for it, that's gonna kill that fun.
Right. So that's
mechanic dice rolls is secondary to that overall rule.
So I think that's basically my feeling on player agency. I love players to not ask permission, just insert their story elements, because as a game master, I feed off of that creativity, and as was mentioned before, sometimes a player will say something, and if I will learn something from what they've said and incorporate that into the story, and maybe the player guesses something like, "Hey, I knew it was trolls," and I'm going, "Sure was. When you said it 3 games ago." It's when players talk and add to the story. To me, that helps me create a better story as well, and it surprises me because my game world is my player character, and I want to use it as much as possible, and so I want to interact as well. Lastly, the point about the soliloquy in within a Ring of Fire is that a player can spotlight the Flame Tender in that game can spotlight a character, and although they're not taking any physical actions, they can describe what they're emotionally feeling. It's like maybe they're in prison or something, and they can reflect upon the things they've done, or they're in camp and everyone's sleeping, but they can't sleep, and they're thinking about what happened the day before, or they're dreaming about a lost love as they stare off into space. And can it go on too long? Sure, but a rule is if it doesn't happen in game, it never happened. You can have 15 pages of backstory, but if we never see it or hear about it or understand what your motivations are, frankly, it never happened. It's not interesting. And so how does a player get that out? Hey, my character's a paladin, but I used to be a criminal. Well, okay, you don't want to talk about your background, so how do we learn that, and how do you add that into the game without revealing that information by sitting at a campfire and going, hey, I'm a paladin, but I used to be a criminal? Well, a soliloquy is something that would help that out. And I know players are like, well, I don't want to reveal that information, but if you don't reveal it to the game master and the other players, it never happened. So I reward that too. 5th edition, you get inspiration. You do that, definitely inspiration.
Awesome.
So, I'm done.
So let's hear from Benjamin and what he does for pre-game jitters and his take on narration.
Well, I do hear what other people are saying about wanting to check out your notes to make sure you're familiar with what you have going on. Make sure that you have the basics to run the game. But I do also have that kind of anxiety generally, and there's an energy, I think, that is created inside you, and I really liked what DBJ was talking about, watching films and so forth, the scenes with the themes or with the feel for what you're going for. I think that helps focus that energy. I think for me, one of the worst parts about when I have anxiety is that things are going in so many different directions, or concentrating so hard on a detail that it just hurts my brain. There's these like ricochets in your brain, and so I kind of like the idea of getting something that gets you on track, gets you focused but not hyper focused. And I don't know. I think I'll probably end up doing that. But I do know that there's an issue for me of transitioning from just talking with your friends to the actual starting of the game, and I think we have it right when we talk about having somebody say this is what happened last game, and even incentivizing that, saying, in GURPS terms, here, who wants a bonus point for saying what happened last game? And everyone wants a bonus point, right? Doing something like that gets them engaged immediately, and immediately switches you from just talking with your friends into the actual game itself. And I think it changes people's roles, their social roles, not their character roles, but I become the game master instead of the friend, and they become a player rather than a friend, and everybody starts treating each other with that in mind and taking the game at least as seriously as it needs to have fun. But if I was going to move on to narration, character agency, pacing is extremely important to me as a player, and I think that translates also into the game master role. I want things to move along at a steady pace. I don't want there to be big stopping points where there's nothing really happening. And sometimes it's very hard for me to get to the point where I can say, okay, everyone's talking and they've been talking for 20 minutes and you weren't expecting that, but people are having a good time. I can't just assume that because it's taken 20 minutes that everybody isn't having a good time. But I do think that's a good time to look for people in the group who may not be participating. Uh, it's not interesting to them whatever conversation is going on. And making sure that they get included somehow, which for me has always usually included, by the way, because you're not involved in this conversation, you do see this extra thing, this extra piece that you can react to. What do you do about it? And it can start motivating the group into action, or at least making sure everybody gets some of that limelight that sometimes that situation can leave people out kind of in the cold. I was very happy. I actually started in my little notes talking about the yes and thing that DBJ was talking about. So when he said it, I was like, yes, I might be on the right track here. So I have friends who do this improv group called Comedy Sports, and one of the things they're always talking about is yes and. It's kind of all of your ideas together, and it makes me think of the Office. A lot of people pay a lot of attention to that television show, but the main character who we love to hate, Michael Scott, is a part of an improv group, and nobody in the group appreciates his addition to the group because whenever it comes to him, he has a gun and he threatens people to do what he says, which, maybe once or twice that works, but if that's all they're doing, and it can demolish everybody else. And it's the equivalent of saying no, right, as a player. And I don't know the best way to handle that as a game master, except to make sure that everybody gets their own limelight. So the one person is maybe taking control of things with what they're adding. Try to say, okay, so that's your turn, and move on to somebody else, and make sure that everybody gets that same opportunity. And
Yeah, that's definitely important. I'm gonna have to cut that question off there because we are running over on time, and we wanted to give Devin as a player a chance to ask a question. And this is kind of the one question you as a player would ask your DM.
All right, so we're moving into the realm of online gaming. I'm sure that most, or if not all of us, have ran using Roll20. And that means that applications and trying to get to know the person behind the application that you're getting is getting a little more difficult. What is it that you look for in an application, and how do you handle getting new players in this new online sort of open market environment?
Okay, hey Matt, would you care to take first crack at that?
Yeah, sure. For me, when I'm looking to put a group together or I'm looking to run a game, there are a couple different ways that I might go about it. I might approach players individually and ask if they're interested. That's sort of what I did when I got the Provokers game going. Was I approached each player individually and asked if they would be interested in playing in a one-shot, and then the one-shot became 17 sessions. And another thing I like to do is I like to put up a post. There's a lot of groups on Facebook where you can organize one-shot games and campaigns and things like that. There's the Tabletop RPG one-shot group. There's the Absolute Tabletop official group. There are a few other Tides of Change if you're interested in Star Wars. You can put up a post and basically say, here's the basic gist of the game. I want to run a Dragon Riders game for D&D, or I want to run, Fate superheroes. And you put up a brief description and some of the expectations about what you want from the game, whether you're going to require a webcam or if you're going to be providing pre-generated characters or people are expected to come with a character ready to go. And people will comment and express their interest, and you can pick from there. What I've done in the past is I might pick 2 players and then randomly select 2 players. So I get 2 players that I know I'm going to gel with, that I know, maybe I've gamed with them before, maybe I'm interested in gaming with them because I've seen them in other games. And then 2 players that I may not know or may be completely new to me. And when I play with someone that I've never played before, I always learn something. I always learn something new. I always get something out of it. So I never shy away from gaming with new people, even though it might make me a little bit uncomfortable if I'm going into a game and I'm not sure what to expect, because I know at the very least, worst case scenario, I am going to get something out of it and I'm going to be a better player and a better game master for it.
Awesome. Jake, how about you?
I would have to say, if you're going to try to find people to play with, use a paid group. Dawn Forgecast is a really good group. If you're a patron for Dawn Forgecast, you get into a group that is like-minded people. And the reason I say a paid group is because free groups, where you're just posting on forums or Reddits or things like that, tend to be very caustic. It's a lot of people that are not... they're not very focused on the hobby. It might be a passing thing. I've had some of my worst experiences with random people that I've met through forums like Roll20 and things like that. Worst experiences I've ever had role-playing. However, if you have no ability or no interest in doing a paid group, be very willing to go into those situations where it's going to be bad, but scavenge the good players. People, out of the 5 people you met, if there's one person, keep that guy's contacts. Keep talking to that person. That's how you're going to find your group, is kind of, shilling all the stuff over your shoulder and keep on trucking through. I think also Devin mentioned like getting to know players. What I do is every 4 to 5 sessions, so basically once a month, I will sit down with each player individually and give feedback. And that goes for all my online games as well. Sit down, give them, hey, this is how I think you're doing. Here's areas where I think you should improve. And here's questions that I have about your character, where things that I've thought of that you haven't addressed yet, such as where do you get your magic capabilities from? How is your family? What do you think about this? But just constant communication is a really good way to get to know your players.
Awesome. How about you, DBJ?
I'm a little unforgiving. I'm far too old to have to waste my time with negative people. I really I have a small group of people that I know, and so what I do is, and it's unfortunate, I vet people first, and I do it in a way that by looking at their social media, and this isn't trolling like I'm going to search everything they have to say, but if I find that through various means, whether it means they're commenting on videos, whether on Facebook, they're getting on Google Plus, depending on that person's attitude, will be based on whether I would like to game with them. And if I find that and this person doesn't have to make anything towards me, but if I find someone is either like open towards a particular type of gaming, a method, or they are a very positive person, I will use those people to vet third-party people. So, like I'll say, like with Matt, I feel like he can vet other individuals to me that I feel would not be caustic to my life, because I don't really have time for that. I've heard so many horror stories of, because we play online, that there are some people who are nearly criminal in their actions online with other individuals. And even on a minor note, why there are people who are just plain cheaters in a social game. I don't understand that. That boggles my mind. It's like, dude, if you want to cheat, why don't you stay at home, write your own story, make yourself the hero, and be done with it? You can write your own fan fiction. You don't need to get me involved in that. So I use other people to vet for me like a web, and I hope other people are doing that with me, because I post on social media. I talk about things. If someone doesn't like my particular opinion, I would hope that they would fade away from me. If someone's like, hey, he seems like an alright guy, they will fall into like where our gravity will kind of meet together. And so in many ways, I hope people are vetting my interactions on social media, and I do that sometimes on purpose, because something just will irk me, or I want to make a comment about a particular subject or something, and if someone else sees that, maybe they will say, hey, he seems interesting, I'd like to bring him into my game. So that's how I do it.
Yeah, one of the ways I do that is not only watching comments and messages is, and recommendations. I also have the Disabled DM Facebook group that I'm pretty selective on who gets invited to it. It's people I get along with that I've talked to, that I watch uh, on YouTube, and just having seen them around, talk to them, be in a hangout with them, I know we can get along. So those people tend to get invites, as well as the people who support me and do what I'm doing. So Benjamin, how about you?
Yeah, I'm really new to this online stuff, and I'm really looking forward to it. I had my first experience really with it today. With Google Hangouts worked out really, really well. I, I've done some before this. It's always been people I've known. I've done some using text software to do things with text, which is nice too. Um, I'm just learning from you guys on this one. It's kind of my first day on it, so I appreciate everybody giving me some good notes.
Awesome. So that's pretty much, I think we've answered the basic of that question as a player. Devin, how do you feel we did on answering it? Or is there anything more in depth on it you would like to know?
No, I think that's fine. I think you pretty much got it, yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and do some outros, and we'll go out there and we can hang out for a few minutes if you guys wish us afterwards. So Matt, how about you kick us off with an outro?
Sure thing, man. Yeah, I'm Matt. I run the channel A Fistful of Dice, and I'm also I work over at Absolute Tabletop on RPG supplements. And in terms of plugging something, I'll plug the Absolute Tabletop official group on Facebook. You can go there, and there's a lot of people who are talking about awesome stuff and running games and playing in games totally for free. So definitely go check it out and throw your hat in the ring, man.
Awesome. Jake?
For me, the only contributions that I do YouTube for role-playing wise would be Dawn Forgecast. Additionally, if you want to see something more of the sci-fi area, there's also a channel, Vaults of Terra. If you want to see more of me, I am a player, for once, very rare, in a Dark Heresy campaign, first edition. So that's Vaults of Terra if you want to check me out, being an Imperial Guardsman.
Awesome. Devin, you're up.
All right. I don't have a channel, but I run the Sinland Trials for Dawn Forgecast and a couple of other guys, and I play as Wambach in Typhon, which is a Dawn Forgecast campaign, and Kataga the Druid in Fuzz and Friends.
Awesome. DBJ?
All right. I'm gonna plug a couple of things that I've got going on. It's Cinematic Environs. There are 3 supplements available at Drive-Thru RPG by Critical Hit Publishing, written by myself and Alex, aka Captain Gothnog, and Rob the Swamper Davis. and there will be more to follow after that. I do have a YouTube channel, but instead of spelling out the name, it's better just to type in Bring Back the Magic. Do not, well, listen to the song first of the same title. Go down below that. You'll see a guy with dreads and some gray hairs in his face. Click on that, and take a look at some of the things I have to say. And that is it. Oh, last plug is I'm wearing an orange bandana because I finished a walk in Columbus, Ohio for cystic fibrosis. So a plug to supporting and donating to cystic fibrosis and those that suffer from its effects.
Awesome. Benjamin?
Well, I'm the second generation gamer. I'm really happy to find Tabletop RPG One Shot Group on Facebook. I like to see all the possibilities out there, all the different people wanting to play, all the different people wanting to game master. I guess I can plug that I have a convention game that I wrote in honor of my mother, who was also a gamer, kind of a thing that we did together as kids. Her name is Sojourner O'Connor, and wherever she is now, I respect for that, and I hope I do a good job of doing the kind of games that she liked to run.
Awesome. That's really awesome to have a mother who's a gamer. I wish mine was. And as always, I'm Jebediah. You can find me on Facebook. Links will be below. Disabled DM YouTube channel, Disabled DM private Facebook group. And I just want to say a big thank you to my guests today for an awesome time. And as always, may the dice roll in your favor.